Hi, thanks for joining me. I've realized at this point that there are going to be things that I've left out in previous videos that I'm going to come back to and say, oh, yes, that happened in that year. So, my review of the 2010s, I have got up to the year 2015. Um, to do that initially, things I left off from previous videos, 2011 was the year that Queen Elizabeth II made a state visit to the Republic of Ireland. It was a very big thing for both countries because it's the first time in modern history that it's happened, certainly since the Irish Republic became independent. So that was a notable event. And in the same year, she famously met Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, I should say, of Sinn Féin. So that was a notable event of the year 2011. President Obama also made a state visit to Ireland that year. Now, 2015, very eventful year. As you can see, I've got notes here. This is kind of how I do it, a little bit scrappy, so I'm going to go through these. Firstly, for the year 2014, just to round off what I was doing for that year, the Nobel Peace Prize that year, I don't believe I read those out, was Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani schoolgirl, was a joint Nobel laureate with Kailash Satyarthi. And again, if I make any mistakes of pronunciation on names, please accept my apologies. But given the time frame and so on. So yes, and he is activist against child labor in India. So they were the joint Nobel Peace Prize winners for the year 2014. For 2015, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize was the Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet, who had worked hard to secure relative peace in Tunisia. It's kind of seen as the relative success story of Arab Spring. If Arab Spring had very much turned into Arab Winter at this point, Tunisia was the exception. It had went relatively forward, and it was a more successful story than, say, for example, Syria. Um, like I say, very busy year 2015. The Expo 2015 event was held in Milan, Italy, and it went by the tagline, the promotional tag, Feeding the Planet, Energy for the Future. And some 22.5 million visitors went to that expo, so it was a particularly big one. In China, major industrial accident in the city of Tianjin. 173 people were killed, hundreds of vehicles destroyed, massive damage, and the explosion could be seen miles away. So it was a major, major industrial accident. Um, 2015 was a very turbulent year for international terrorism, unfortunately, particularly in France. Early in the year, the newspaper cartoon strip Charlie Hebdo, of course, suffered a brutal attack by Islamists, killing 12 of their cartoonists and provoking worldwide outrage. And that resulted in a big unity march in Paris the following day, which was attended by the following week, which was attended by world leaders. And it once again opened up the debate about intolerance within pan Islamism and the limits of free speech and issues around that. Later in the year, of course, Paris saw the appalling atrocity at Bataclan Theatre and other sites in which 131 people were killed. The worst terrorist attack in modern French history, one of the worst in European history, and it provoked again worldwide outrage and worldwide solidarity as well with France and the people of France, and brought great pressure on the Hollande administration to deal with this. There were, of course, there was a viral campaign online showing many people change their profile pictures to the French flag. So that was a very defining event of 2015. In response to that, the West conducted airstrikes in Syria against ISIS targets, which were largely supported but also had their critics, as these things always do. But like I say, 2015 in general was a bad year for terrorism early in the year, and there was some criticism that this got overshadowed by the Charlie Hebdo attack. There was an appalling atrocity in Baga, Nigeria, when somewhere between 200 and 2,000 people were slaughtered in that town by Boko Haram. Now, this is thought to be the worst massacre in the Boko Haram insurgency to date, and was a particularly glaring example of how sometimes there is a difference in how things are reported depending on what country that they're in. that was an appalling atrocity and showed how ruthless Boko Haram was as a terror organization. The same year, Garissa, Kenya, an attack at a university complex killed 148 people at the hands of Al Shabaab. Um, in a single day, there was a series of three terror attacks, one in Kobani, Syria, 220 people killed, one a bombing at a mosque in Kuwait, 27 killed, and another targeting Western tourists on a beach in Tunisia, the Sousse attack, 39 killed. This was within a 24-hour period. So 2015 really is a year that's notorious. I mean, there's terror attacks every year, but I think 2015 particularly stands out for that reason. And there was also an atrocity in Ankara, Turkey, the worst terrorist attack in modern Turkish history. 109 people killed, many of them young people, at a rally, and the culprits have still not been identified over that atrocity. So 2015 is really a year that saw a lot of atrocities in terms of terrorism. Now, 2015, Ireland became the first country in the world to legalise same-sex marriage by popular vote. And this was quite a turnaround for a country that had long been seen as socially conservative Catholic country. So that was a big turnaround. Um, Also, in keeping with terrorism, another major incident that occurred, which also ranks as the worst aviation accident of the year, or worst aviation incident, I should say, and was actually even deadlier than the Paris attack, was the bombing of the Russian Metrojet Flight 9268, which was blown up over Sinai, Egypt, with some 224 souls on board. And this provoked, obviously, a lot of outrage. Charlie Hebdo got in hot water over that, over a pretty tasteless cartoon that they produced in response, which Russia, understandably, was not happy about. Um, 2015 will be remembered as the year of the EU migrant crisis. This was a year when a massive influx of refugees, economic migrants, and people came into the European Union. Now, I mention that because it caused sometimes very heated debate within EU countries, particularly in the UK and elsewhere, over the nature of people who were coming in. Were they legitimate refugees? Were they economic migrants? How many can we take? Issues around integration. This was highlighted by a notorious incident on New Year's Day. I don't know if it was in 2015, it might have been the following year, when a large number of German women were reportedly raped in the city of Cologne by migrants. And this was thought to be censored because there was a view that it didn't, there was a reluctance to kind of inflame racial tensions, but that caused a big backlash because the perception was that the safety of these women was secondary to basically political correctness. Um, so that was one of the big sort of social controversies around this migrant crisis. On the other hand, it is irrefutable the world was a humanitarian crisis. Um, in the Mediterranean, there was many tragedies in which overcrowded boats sank, and this put massive pressure, particularly on Italy and Greece and Cyprus. Spain had a more hardline approach, but in two incidents alone on in the Mediterranean, in one sinking tragedy, 500 people were killed, in another over 800. So, although there had been migrant tragedies before on the Mediterranean, 2015 was really the year that this came to the fore, and Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was actually voted Time Magazine Person of the Year for 2015, as they said, for her leadership on the migrant crisis and for her handling of the Greek debt crisis, actually faced significant domestic anger and opposition for what many saw as a reckless policy of letting in 1 million, upwards of 1 million people in to Germany at once, which, like I say, caused great social tensions. Another migrant tragedy, not all of these tragedies took place at sea. One of them was an incident in Austria when 71 migrants were found suffocated on a lorry, in a lorry, I should say. So 2015 is really the year that we remember overcrowded boats full of Eritreans, Syrians, Yemenis. It was really a tragic crisis. And yeah, anyway, my point of these videos is not to get into in-depth political commentary, but we can't ignore that that was one of the big defining events of 2015. In Burma, the Rohingya crisis also continued that year, Um, and the other major refugee crisis in the world, of course, in Central America. So those three regions, Central America, the European Union, and Southeast Asia, saw three major waves of people, different circumstances, but some similar trends: economic issues, political instability, persecution, and inevitably these all led to rigorous debates within the host nations. So that's something I'll always remember with the year 2015. 2015, well, there was more than two massacres in the United States, but two particularly notable. One was in Charleston, South Carolina, when the white supremacist Dylan Roof opened fire on a black congregation, killing nine people. That, of course, added to the debate around racial issues in the United States. One thing that was remarkable was the leadership and the tolerance that the church showed, not only to Dylan Roof in sort of letting him into the congregation, but actually the response to it wasn't vitriolic, wasn't hate filled. It was very admirable, actually. The same year, Waco, Texas, there was a shootout involving biker gangs, nine also killed, and it was one of the most serious flare ups between rival biker groups in years. Um, Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah died, was succeeded by King Salman bin Saud. Hajj, the famous Islamic pilgrimage to Hajj, saw two big disasters that year. The first one was a crane collapse, killing 118 people. The second one was a massive stampede in which some 2,000 people were killed, and hundreds of the victims were Iranians. This led to significant tensions, well, increasing in tensions, I should say, between Iran and Saudi Arabia over the Saudis' handling of this. But that was the worst ever disaster recorded at the Hajj. And this is an event that often attracts tragedy, crowd stampedes, structural collapses, and so on because of the sheer numbers involved. Um, in Syria, the war raged on, and the ancient city of Palmyra was captured by ISIS, who vandalized it. And this was seen as a tragic example of the effects of war, particularly the effects that ruthless terrorist organizations can have, um, particularly Islamist organizations, in trying to destroy history. It had echoes, of course, of the destroying of the Buddhas in Afghanistan in the early 2000s. So that led to debate over how ancient monuments can be preserved in war zones. Um, so in the year 2015, Queen Elizabeth II became Britain's longest serving monarch, surpassing Queen Victoria, having at that point been on the throne for some 63 years. In Russia, the opposition figure Boris Nemtsov was assassinated on a bridge in Moscow, which led to protests against the Putin regime. In Yemen, civil war broke out, and Saudi Arabia intervened in that conflict in response to Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia. So a humanitarian crisis broke out in Yemen that year, which for the first time kind of overshadowed what was happening in Syria. In Burundi, political unrest broke out when the President Pierre Nkurunziza extended his term limits. This led to serious violence and even fears that the country would return to civil war, which never completely happened, but still led to hundreds of deaths. The Ebola crisis continued, however, on a more positive note. The World Health Organization announced that rubella had been completely eradicated from North America, and Cuba announced that it had completely eradicated mother-child HIV cases. In Paris, the Paris Climate Agreement was signed by most of the major powers. Of course, Donald Trump has went back on that, but that was seen as a major landmark in fight against climate change. Of course, some climate activists said it didn't go far enough. Others said that it was pandering to climate hysteria, but it was a sweeping agreement. Um, I'm trying to be as inclusive as always with this. The worst natural disaster of the year took place in the mountain kingdom of Nepal. Terrible earthquake, which many videos went viral online showing from a tourist perspective, public squares shaking and so on. There was significant damage, and almost 9,000 people lost their lives. So obviously a big international response. Today, incidentally, marks exactly 10 years since the Haiti earthquake, so that's topical. Some 9,000 people died in the Nepal earthquake of 2015. Turkey went to all-out war with the PKK, and this led to a lot of civilian deaths, has led to a lot of civilian deaths so far in the crossfire between the two sides. The FIFA corruption scandal, FIFA president Sepp Blatter was forced to step down. Um, in science, a previously unknown species, Homo naledi, was discovered in South Africa, which brought even more interest to human genealogy and human evolution. This particular species was thought to be significantly older than any previously discovered. Um, in the Far East, Xi Jinping met President Ma Ying-jeou of Taiwan. This was the first face-to-face meeting between Chinese president and his Taiwanese counterpart. Um, so what else can I include? On Mars, liquid water was discovered for the first time as announced by NASA. Tensions broke out between Turkey and Russia after a Russian jet, the Sukhoi Su-24, was shot down on Turkish airspace. This led to an international incident and fears of World War III, which of course never transpired. Both sides managed to sort that out diplomatically. Um, 2015 was a year that saw many commemorations for the end of World War II. This marked exactly 70 years since World War II ended. There were huge parades, military parades in both Beijing and Moscow, two countries, of course, that had suffered enormously in World War II, China and the Soviet Union, as it then was. But there was some controversy that China, in particular, was using its military parade less to commemorate the sacrifice of World War II and more to show off the strengths of the PLA today. The disputes of the South China Sea continued in 2015. 2015 saw 70 years since the Battle of Berlin, 70 years since the end of World War II, the VJ Day, VE Day. Um, and finally, I think I'll round up with the Academy Awards for the year 2015. Well, I should say 2014. The winners were Best Picture for the year 2014. Bearing in mind this was held in 2015, went to Birdman, The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, directed by Alejandro Inarritu, and he also won Best Director that year. Eddie Redmayne won Best Actor for The Theory of Everything. Julianne Moore won Best Actress for Still Alice, which was a drama about a woman who suffered Alzheimer's, which is something I'd like to see actually. Um, Now, the following year for 2015, which was of course held in 2016, I have to keep stressing that point because it could be somewhat confusing. The the Oscars for a given year are always held on the following year. So the winners for the year 2015, held in 2016, Best Picture went to Spotlight. Best Director went to Alejandro Inarritu for The Revenant. Best Actor went to Leonardo DiCaprio. Finally, there was a whole thing over when will Leo finally get his Oscar, so he finally did in 2016 for the year 2015. Brie Larson won for her role in, I think, The Room. I may be wrong about that, but I think that was what she won it for. In sporting terms, the super fight between Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, won by Floyd Mayweather, somewhat controversial. It was the most expensive boxing match in history at that point. Some hardcore boxing fans said it was a disappointment. I personally feel it wasn't quite worth the hype it got, but by the same token, it wasn't as bad as the fans made it out to be. But anyway, huge hype over these two long-standing, great fighters. They're both ranked among the all-time pound-for-pound greatest fighters of all time. So the super fight between Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather in Las Vegas. Also that year, the Iran nuclear deal in Vienna, which of course is now totally being retracted. Um, and in Britain, I'll close with this. Our general election that year, David Cameron secured a majority for the Conservatives, which meant the Liberal Democrats had to leave coalition. Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg lost his seat. The Scottish National Party done very well in Scotland. So that is the year 2015. As always, I'm sure there'll be many other things. Um, yeah, I will mention this because it was quite a big issue at the time. German Wings Flight 9525 crashed in the Alps, in the French Alps, killing 150 people, and attention turned on the pilot, Andreas Lubitz, and the idea that he may have deliberately crashed that. His family still insists that wasn't the case, but it remains a highly controversial thing. So very turbulent year 2015, a year that unfortunately will be remembered for terrorism and the EU migrant crisis in particular. I think those are probably the two defining events of the year. But ever, no year can be called all good or all bad. Any one of these years will be good and bad things. So the next video, 2016, I'll try to yeah, try to stick with that. So feel free to add anything to this. I'm trying to be as comprehensive as possible. I'm trying to include a bit of science, a bit of geopolitics, etc. But feel free to add anything for any given year as you see fit. Thanks for watching.